Hi, everybody. This is Matt from Audiommunity at emunity.org, coming to you from Monday, May 4th, 2015, to talk about Minisode 9 today. And I wanted to discuss a little bit about poliovirus. And poliovirus is something that I think people hear and they associate with infection, they associate with paralysis, maybe ongoing polio vaccine efforts in Pakistan if you are somewhat news savvy. I imagine most of you are. If you're listening to a podcast about immunology, chances are good that you're also watching the news. So I was actually watching the news the other day with my fiance Emily up in Columbus, Ohio, and we came across 60 Minutes, which is, something that I'll listen to if it's on, certainly. I tend to like their narratives. And one of the stories that came on 60 Minutes was a story about polio. But it was a little bit different. It had a bit of a twist. We were talking polio and cancer. And to be honest, that was something that I had never heard of. And I think I speak for many scientists in the life sciences where when you're listening to the news and someone starts talking about a cure for cancer, the hair on the back of your neck sort of stands up a little bit, because I think that there is a healthy skepticism, an overwhelming skepticism, actually, that immediately clicks onto my brain when a news reporter comes on and tells me that they have cured cancer in some lab or another. So I'm not going to lie, my brain shut down a little bit. Things started to gloss over. But after a while of listening and actually sort of independent interest, I started looking into this. And I think it's actually worth talking about. So before I get too far into this, I want to mention whose work it is, certainly. So these are two MDs, Matthias Gromier and Alan Friedman, who are the surgeon and principal investigator of ongoing studies in the Preston Robert Tisch Brain Tumor Center at Duke University. So I mentioned that they are using poliovirus to try to cure cancer. Now, several efforts, a lot of different efforts have been made at curing cancer through the introduction of new drugs. People have tried to use viruses in the past. People have tried to use 100 different delivery methods. And, you sort of always get the same storyline. Researcher cures cancer in labs, in mice, in cells, in, whatever model it happens to be at the time. And I think we've argued on this podcast before that the trick is never killing. It's pretty easy to kill cells. You can kill cells in a number of different ways. Granted, tumor cells are a little harder to kill than your normal, everyday, average eukaryotic cell, but they're still relatively easy to kill. The hard part about cancer is that cancer cells look so much like your normal cells that it can be very, very difficult to target them. So it's the targeting that is the problem. It's not necessarily how do you kill the cancer. So anytime somebody comes up with a new or interesting way of determining what is malignancy, what is normal tissue, is actually a relatively exciting finding. So those studies are usually worth mentioning, and I think that this actually may be one of those studies. So I think I've mentioned in the past that tumor immunology is an up-and-coming field. It turns out your immune system is very, very good at identifying what is cancer, what is not cancer. But one of the major problems in making that decision is that the tumor has also evolved usually ways of telling the immune system, well, yeah, I don't really look like you, but it's okay. Really, it's fine. There's no infection. There's nothing going on here that you need to be worrying about. And so just let me do my thing. I'm going to let you do your thing. And what ends up happening is the tumor grows and grows and grows. Your immune system knows that it's there most of the time, but it just doesn't do anything. It sort of allows the tumor to continue to grow because there's no reason for it to freak out. Your immune system just doesn't ever get the trigger that says, this is bad, it's time to kill it. And so immunologists have started to push in the direction of, okay, well, if the immune system is being told not to respond, can we overcome that signal? And we've talked on this podcast about the PD-1, PD-L1 blockade trials that are underway from, a number of different companies actually now, which are, I would say, wildly successful to this point. There's some really exciting stuff showing that if you just sort of take the brakes off of your immune system, even for a short period of time, your immune system kind of wakes up, snaps out of it, and realizes, oh my God, this is a tumor. This is something that I really need to be concerned about. And so it goes in and attacks. So this polio approach is a little bit different, but it draws on some of the same principles. Now, poliovirus is a neurotropic virus, so it's going to infect your central nervous system, and this is why you get things like paralysis and all of the other complications of heavy-duty polio infection, which is also why it's such a dangerous disease. So the question is, why does it attack your central nervous system? And the answer with most viruses is that there is a specific receptor on certain cells in your central nervous system that polio recognizes as sort of its partner. It sees this receptor and says, yep, that is the cell that I need to make home. And so in the case of poliovirus, it's finding a receptor called NECL5. It's nectin-like molecule 5. Now, what's interesting about this molecule, this receptor, is that yes, it's expressed in your central nervous system, but if you start taking a look at tumors, and specifically if you start taking a look at malignant tumors, for some reason or another, and as far as I can tell, not a lot is known about exactly why, but for some reason or another, malignancies tend to upregulate NECL5. So this is interesting, right? It makes polio an interesting candidate for a virus that just in its own nature, the way that it's evolved, might actually target malignancies more than healthy living tissue. Now, obviously, you're still going to run into the major neurotropic issues that you have with polio. If I just start taking patients with malignant cancers, injecting them with polio, will it infect the malignancies? Perhaps. Is it more likely to cause ascending paralysis and eventually death of polio? Yeah, sure it is. So there's actually two problems here. The first is the problem of targeting. And because you're using polio, the second problem is the problem of neurotoxicity. So these researchers and physicians have actually found a way to attenuate the polio virus such that because of the way that polio replicates, and we've mentioned before that viruses really rely on the host cells that they infect in order to initiate replication, what you can do is you can take a slightly modified, slightly less robust version of polio, and if you give patients that version of polio, the polio still infects the central nervous system, it still infects the malignancies, but for some reason or another, and we're not entirely sure of the mechanism yet, the polio is actually capable of killing the malignancies while leaving the normal neural tissue intact. So this is really exciting, right? This suggests that you could take this attenuated polio, you could give it to patients, that polio virus would infect tumors around the patient's body, and eventually it would sort of wake up the immune system in the surrounding area. So if you have virally infected cells, your immune system, while it might not have recognized the cancer, will certainly recognize the fact that you have a large viral infection coming out of this tumor. So your immune system seems to kick on. It starts to recognize the viral infection. It also starts to recognize the tumor itself. So now you've sort of released the brakes, not by necessarily preventing the tumor from talking to the immune system, but instead by virally infecting the tumor and then allowing your immune system to recognize that tumor as infected normally. So like I said, I was extremely skeptic when I first heard this. I thought, one more way that we can kill a cancer cell in a dish, but actually, I think that this one is worthy of following, so I will continue to follow it. Hopefully, if there are any exciting updates, I'll be able to update you in a future minisode, but for now, it does appear that they've treated a couple people pretty successfully, which had otherwise deadly glioblastomas. There have been a couple issues. Someone has actually died of neuroinflammation during the treatment. You can imagine that immune invasion of your central nervous system is not necessarily something that people are excited about, but the alternative, unfortunately, in an advanced case of glioblastoma is pretty quick death. So certainly worth following, like I said, and hopefully more treatments like this will emerge. Hopefully this treatment continues to broaden, and hopefully we'll be able to give you more interesting updates on cancer immunology in the future. So with that, why don't we wrap up the minisode here. As always, any comments, anything that you want to know more about on polio or anything else, just shoot us a quick email. We're actually starting to get a couple that we're really looking forward to answering in upcoming episodes. Kevin is actually out on his honeymoon in Europe at the moment, so it might take us just a little bit to get to a full episode, but any questions we'll be sure to address in the coming weeks and months. So, as always, thank you for listening. This has been Audiommunity Minisode 9, and hope to catch you later.